Welcome everyone. This webinar is going to look at improving communications and coordination with regional fleet movement. So this briefing is going to be provided by the Fleet Response Working Group of the All Hazards Consortium to the public sector liaisons at the state level, as well as FEMA, DHS, and some other folks within DHS and FEMA, private sector security advisors. What I want to do is first introduce our speakers, and then we can jump into our slides. First, our speaker, John Shaner, is the chair of the Fleet Response Working Group. John was formerly with Pepco Holdings, Inc., has been around the electric industry for a long time, well respected, and you'll get a chance to hear from John today as well in detail on some of these things that he's had a big hand in. Additionally, Chris Eisenbray is on the phone. Chris is the Director for Business Continuity at the Edison Electric Institute in Washington, D.C. They represent all of the publicly traded utilities across the nation. They do a lot of policy work, and they've been great supporters and act as kind of a liaison, if you will, from the Fleet Working Group into the federal level. Chris Eisenbray is on the phone with us today. So with that, let me jump into what you're going to hear today in our webinar. First, what is this process? Why was it created? How is it activated? Who's involved? What will be your role as a federal or state, local, or whichever role you're in the public sector? How you can stay updated and what resources are available. So first, let me just touch on what is the fleet movement coordination process. This is a process jointly developed by multiple states in FEMA Region 3 and Region 2 during the CADEX 2013 exercise. It's designed to coordinate regional electric sector fleet movements across multiple states. Through the workshop that was held ahead of time, they determined one of the big problems is how do we alert 20, 30 states at one time of a fleet movement that could be having trucks coming from all over the country into a specific area. We wanted to reduce the delays in the pass-through states at way stations and toll stations, so forth. The process provides regional situational awareness to all involved, and it really expedites power restoration in a safe, legal way. So that's a snapshot of what the process is. Graphically, what we try to do is showcase what the Fleet Working Group does with this process is synchronize the regional mutual assistance groups in the private sector along with the state, local, federal agencies that are involved with fleets that move. And I must say that it is not a simple thing to understand, but it seems to be working and synchronizing with the partners on the phone today and the folks that will be listening to this afterwards. Hopefully this will provide a good education for everyone. So with that, I want to introduce our chair for the Fleet Response Working Group, Mr. John Shaner. John?
Thank you, Tom, and welcome everybody for attending this webinar. This slide here is a slide that really kind of takes me back. When we went into this, DHS brought a few of the private sectors together, the electric sector, financial, and some fuel, so forth, into a small meeting. What we call choke points, things that delayed responses to events. And this stems back to before Katrina. While those items came up again and again in different events, we decided to sit down and talk about them. Well, after that meeting, I was invited to the Board of the Directors meeting, which is mainly public sector. Many of them are state EMA directors. And we had a closed-door conversation, and we had a very open, honest, respectful discussion. But we really said what was on our mind. And, you know, this talks about we're in this stress. And one of the things that this brings back, and Chris Geldart from Washington, D.C., and I got into a pretty verbal discussion. And when it came down to it, when we were all done, we were saying the same thing. One of the things that I focused on from the electric sector is getting the power back on. What I saw that the directors of the EMAs were focused on, they had a bigger scope. They were not just the power getting back on, but everything else that's encompassed health, welfare, everything else, transportation, encompassed in that organization. And coming out of that, my focus was, hey, we are in this together. It's not just restoration, and we have to work. And this took me back to Katrina. An example I gave you, I remember when the whole nation was responding to Texas, Arkansas, those places that were affected by Katrina. And there was a gas pumping station the Department of Energy actually contacted the utilities about. It was out of power, and the gas prices and shortages were possible if it didn't get its power back on. And by working together, that we're all in this together, we were able to actually divert resources, get that pumping station back in service, and alleviate the issue or the threat that could have occurred on the East Coast. Next slide, please. They're controlling this. Okay, so we're on slide 8, and basically this is showing the integrated planning and governance framework between the private side and the public side of the All Hazards Consortium. On the private side, we have the multi-state fleet response working group that while we're focused on power initially, we are also focusing on many of the same issues that affect transportation, telecom, food, water, etc. On the public side, we utilize them in the EC3 group, the East Coast Corridor Coalition. We utilize them as advisors, and we actually bounce ideas off them, and then they bounce ideas off us from a private sector side. So this has been a well used and a very well developed format for private and public to work together. Next slide, please. One of the things I do want to talk about is while we're looking at things from a short-term, mid-term, long-term in solution, and I'll talk more about choke points in a minute, one of the things is where do we want to end up? It would be great if we had an event, whether it's small, medium, or large, or even catastrophic, such as Sandy, Katrina, the derecho, to name a few, that all our solutions that could delay restoration from the electric sector or movement of critical resources from any other sector, that they are sustainable. So what we do for one storm is the same thing we do for the next storm. What we do for a small event is the same thing, but more of for a big event. It would be nice if we didn't have to worry about declarations or waivers giving us some exemptions to get things accomplished. So, and that will affect both the private and public sector. First of all, private sector trying to obtain them, and the public sector actually creating the declarations and waivers for the private sector. We want to have the ability to move past weigh stations legally. We just had a phone call on weigh stations, and many of the commercial motor vehicle companies are registered as either intrastate or interstate. Intrastate are trucks that are legal in the state, but when they travel outside, they have to purchase additional permits so that financially other states are compensated. So it's more of a compliance type thing, and we just talked about this. And while the weights may be a little bit of difference when it comes to the interstate, for the most part, these trucks technically will not harm this road. So one of the things we want to figure out is what can we do from the private sector side, what can we do from the public sector side to come up with a way that these bucket trucks, these emergency responders can legally, safely, and paying their dues, move past the weigh stations without those delays. Utilizing toll road, easy pass lanes, obtaining information on hotels, fuels, and security. While people are out of power and they're looking for hotels, it's really becomes a major problem when we are moving resources by the hundreds up the road and there's nothing available. Fuel shortages, or there's hotel issues, or there's airports that we don't have access to. They're okay to get in and out, but and we just don't have access to them. And then be able to share this information between private and public sector in a way that it doesn't cause a problem with the private sector after the event. Next slide, please. We're on slide 10 for those following the slideshow. Tom?
Yeah.
Tom, are you still there?
Yeah, John, sorry, I was on mute. Yes, we're on slide 10.
Yeah, I'm still showing slide 9.
Stand by.
The next slide, while Tom's bringing it up, is going to talk about some of the areas that we've been focusing on. This list is by no means complete. This list consists of, to give you an idea, what I just talked about, the intrastate, interstate issues in the private company, understanding what's involved in possibly in a long-range type issue is changing your registration of the vehicles, if that's possible in some cases. And the only way we're going to understand that better is to grasp, do a survey in the private sector, especially in the electric, is to find out how companies are registered and what they're doing as options to move. Yes, now move fleet across state lines. Road information, really the 511 information has solved a lot of this. I'm going to talk later about a coordination effort we do between private and public as far as situational awareness. And one of the things that the states have done in the past in a couple events where we've shared information back and forth is they've supplied some additional information around roads, which we distribute to the private sector. Permits, fuel weight permits are the 3 permits when you're registered as intrastate. That can cause a delay in movement of resources. We've come up with short-term solutions, possibly, in how to obtain those in advance so that does not delay you. Hours of service clarification. There's a misunderstanding on a big part from the private sector, especially in the electric, but this also includes telecom and a few other sectors that we're exempt from hours of service under the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Association, and that's for both maintenance and restoration efforts. So basically the hours of service issue is no longer there, and that hasn't been there since 2006. But sometimes it's difficult for me to understand, but not everybody has a clear understanding of that. Toll passes, one of the things we've worked on, and with the help of Delaware and Tom Moran, we were able to come up with a vendor, come up with a business-friendly accounting in Delaware, which basically allows you to create an account and get 1 transponders, and you can maintain as many trucks as you want underneath that 1 transponder, so that every truck does not have to have that. So that's another area. We talked about federal and state declarations. We talked about road congestions with the 511 coordination. Another big area that we focused on was the U.S.-Canadian border crossing with Canadian and U.S. customs, also with Canadian companies and the utilities in New York. We were able to come up with an advance notice with manifest, a roster to send to a port crossing to allow them to do some preparations in advance. It has actually lowered our delays from 2 hours per truck, worst case scenario, down to 20 seconds per truck. So now the the issue we still have there is educating the private sector of the process and procedure, and we continue to work on that. Parkways that are non-CMV vehicles, that's really not a big issue, considering most of our movement is across interstate. This is more when you get into a localized response, and we've already worked with many of the states that have these and have come up with ways to utilize them when and if needed. And then I talked about way stations. Next slide, please, Tom. I kind of just wanted to show you that all those different choke points that we just talked about doesn't just pertain to the electric sector. When it comes to commercial motor vehicles, basically they cover a large sector. Basically anybody that drives or moves resources that utilizes a commercial motor vehicle. So on our fleet response working group website, there is a disaster products tools drop down, and you'll find many of these under there. And maybe as a follow-up, we can send you the web link so you can take a look at that. Next slide, please. We're on slide 12 for those that are following. What I kind of like to talk about now is the fleet movement coordination process and how that started, and then what the purpose of it is. Back in 2013, when we had our first CAPEX exercise, one of the things that we did as part of the exercise was develop a couple products that could be tested and utilized in the exercise and then during real events. The two products were the electric sector liaison, the person that sits from the private sector inside the EOM or the EOC or the EMA, whatever you want to call it, that represents that private company, and what the expectations are both on the private and public side in a very well documented generic form, so that everybody has a clear understanding what to expect from the private sector and what can be expected from the public sector in that line of communication. The other one was the fleet movement coordination process. And basically it was giving a situational awareness to the public sector for those regions or states that resources were going to move through to get to an impacted area. So like as this example is showing, we have impacted area down south, and we're moving resources from the northeast, from central U.S., from the west, into that area. As part of that movement, this process basically gives a heads up to the public sector in those states where the resources are moving, so that they're aware that we are responding to some sort of event. Next slide, please. As part of that, we have groups in the electric sector called regional mutual assistance groups, and there's 7 of them across the nation and North America. That includes Canada. And I'm sure Chris Eisenbree from EEI will talk more about this in the later slide when he talks about a little bit about the NRE. But these groups are all usually on calls when there's some sort of threat or actual impact, whether it's weather, and this has gone beyond weather events. This was used for the G20 summit. It's used for presidential inaugurations. I'm sure there will be a conference call around the Pope visit within these groups, really just giving people awareness within these utilities that if needed, this is what's going to, here's our limitations, here's what we're going to do, here's what we may need, here's some secure sites when it comes to those other type activities. So these calls go on quite often, more than we like. We hear about Sandy, we hear about the Derecho, the Katrina type events, but these occur for thunderstorms, the bigger thunderstorm activities, ice and snow, And usually they average the regional mutual assistance groups, especially the ones, the North America Mutual Assistance Group, North Atlantic Mutual Assistance Group, and the Southeastern Electrical Exchange Group. They'll average anywhere from 20 to 40 conference calls a year, depending on the activity. And here's an example of the Southeastern Electrical Exchange, how it covers. There's a committee in there that's considered an RMEG, and that's the utility. Next slide, please. We're on slide 16 for those following. Here's the type of information we supply. Now, let me please make one thing clear. The states are already interacting with the private sector within their states. This information does not supersede that information being supplied by the private sector to the public sector as needed and required within that state. What this is giving is a general overview of the activity by a region, or whether it's just like 5 or 10 states, or if it's a major event such as Sandy, this could be a situational awareness for basically the whole North America. So basically we're showing number of resources, number of people moving from one state, and what we're doing is we're talking about where they're going to go. The next slide, please. For those that are following, slide will be on slide 17. So what we end up doing is from the Regional Mutual Assistance Group, they give us the information, the Fleet Response Working Group. We basically put it in by state, the estimated departure time, the estimated time of arrival, whether they're designated as intrastate, interstate registration on their vehicle, how many people, are they crossing the U.S.-Canadian state borderline? If not, that's left blank. Then this varies. This will change according to what events going on, the spreadsheet. But the states, the next groups of states are the pass-through states. These are the states that are not affected by the threat or the ongoing weather event or whatever the event is. These are the states that the trucks are going to drive through. As I mentioned before, the good maturity of the roads being used in movement of resources is the interstate roadways. And then the last group of columns is basically telling you what state they're going through to and what states are impacted. So that's in the light blue, it's the states that are impacted or going to be impacted or a potential to be impacted, and then where the resources that have been requested so far are moving to. Next slide, please. So we've had great support with this this information, and basically we originally started off by doing conference calls. That became a major difficulty because it's hard getting public and private sector onto a call at a specific time. In addition, both private and public sector has many calls that they're running and participating in. So what we did is, since we're sharing information and obtaining it back, we moved to electronic. And this has been very successful because basically anybody sitting at the computer that's qualified to answer these questions will submit the questions almost immediately. We get it back in a very reasonable amount of time, and we are able to distribute it. There's 2 tabs to this sheet, and the first tab is the one I showed you with resources moving. The second tab is the information we get back from the public sector. This could be, how do you want us to handle your weigh stations? Or do you want us to drive by them? Do you want us to drive through? Do you need some sort of advanced notice of what companies are driving through the weigh stations? That type of information. Also, any declarations and waivers that may have already been issued by anybody, we collect those so we have a centralized point to distribute them out to the private sector. That type of information, road closures, curfews, anything like that from that the public sector thinks it's important for us as emergency responders to have. We list here and we add attachments in the email so they have it on when this goes back out. Next slide, please. The Regional Mutual Assistance Group, or the RMA coordination, basically I'm going to describe to you what this is. This is actually the process and the procedure that we developed from 2013 on how to engage the Regional Mutual Assistance Group, what information we're supplying the public sector, what to expect back, that type of thing. Next slide, please. The steps for this is really, we simplified this, and we had our last annual conference we had in Philadelphia. We had some utilities, PECO, Southern, Northeast utilities said, hey, we need some guidance document that is simple, short, and sweet, to the point, is how this is engaged. How do we engage? So basically, there's a first email that comes out from one of the regional mutual assistance groups saying, hey, there's a potential impact, or there is an impact. We may be moving resources, and be prepared. And they may already have resources that they know have been acquired and that are moving, so they supply us that. We make that information generic, like I said. All we need is the number of people, departure, estimated time of arrival, what states they're going through. And then that email is, that spreadsheet is developed, and that goes out to the states and federal agencies such as FEMA, the different regions, depending on where the threat is and what states we're driving through. We'll just keep it down to a regional communication. And then what we do is we ask some questions in there. There's about 5 of them talking about, well, we have solutions around toll roads. We asked about way stations. We asked about, is there any additional instructions that the state wants to give us pertaining to their state? Is there any emergency declarations or waivers already issued? Can you supply those back to us so we can get it out to the companies? And then basically, the last email is we take all that information and we send it back out to the Regional Mutual Assistance Group. And what we expect is this to occur once a day. It could occur more, but we're focusing on once a day. And we try to keep a situational awareness, both on private and public, of what's going on during the event. Again, this does not supersede what's the interaction that is going on between the actual impacted state and the companies that are impacted in that state. Next slide, please. Slide 23. So that information, can be very moving in the sense that 1 minute we could say we have 500 resources, 500 people with 250 trucks moving from these 4 states to these 3 states. A minute later, and I think you all understand this clearly, that could be 1,000 resources moving through from 20 states, moving to 6 states that could be impacted. Well, this sheet here really kind of clarifies that we're doing our best to capture the numbers, their estimated numbers at the time and date. The information is being shared not by companies or contractors specific, because that information is already being discussed at the state level with the private sector in that state. There's no need to get to that level in my mind. The information does not replace or communicate that jurisdictional information. I know I've repeated that 3 times, but that's very important because the states already have things in place to communicate with their private sector back and forth. We talked about who gets the emails. It's operational focus. This information stays within the operational, both private and public. It's not for media use. It's not for regulatory use. It's to get resources from point A to point Z as safely, as legally, as quickly as possible, without harming anybody else. Then, and you can see we have the Department of Transportation, State Police, tolls, EMA directors on the public sector. And then the recipients of email 3 is the Fleet Working Group, Executive Steering Committee, the EEI Mutual Assistance Committee, which consists of the RMAG, and then the Emergency Preparedness, the RMAG officers that are in that committee. And the 4th email goes out again to all these FEMA regions, the EEI groups again, the states, and the federal. These are all operational people, and our focus, both public and private, is to get our communities back to normal. Slide 24, please. And I'm going to give, I'm sure Chris is probably wondering when I'm giving him a chance to talk. And Chris, I'm losing my voice, so you're coming right up to talk about EEI and the RMAGs and the national response. But the conference, these conference calls that go on with the different RMAGs, the engagement of the Fleet Response Working Group is the call of the Regional Mutual Assistance Group. But what we wanted to do in this process is make sure we kept everybody coordinated so that if one RMAG was having calls and the next RMAG was having a call for a different event, and that's very possible. There's very rare we have one event and there's nothing else going on. The good example is during Wilma, we actually sent many resources down to Florida for Hurricane Wilma, and we had a wet snowstorm with leaves still on the tree up in West Virginia, and Pennsylvania that caused some major damage. So we coordinated a multi-event response. But basically, this screen here confirms to all the Regional Mutual Assistance Group and to EEI, which is part of this, that we are going to keep everybody coordinated when the Fleet Response Group gets involved. And if another event occurs, we're going to incorporate that in so that everybody's seeing the same information. On that note, Chris, I'm sorry it took me so long to get here, but would you like to talk about the EEI and the national response event?
Sure, thanks, John. So this is a really good slide that kind of lays out the scaling up of these types of events and how the utilities would respond to them working through the regional mutual assistance groups. Prior to Superstorm Sandy, this slide would only have 2 numbers on it, the single RMAG and the multiple RMAG response. But after Superstorm Sandy, because of lessons learned, we determined that as an industry and as from the shareholder electric company point of view, from that part of the industry, that we really needed to take the response up another level to actually a national response event or a national level response. So as you see on this slide, events take place and the utilities within the RMAGs determine how they want to respond. Some events can be handled just by resources and utilities that are members of a single RMAG. If there's a larger event, storm, earthquake, hurricane, ice storm, where the single RMAG needs to call for resources beyond the borders of that RMAG, then they can have multiple RMAG response to that event where they coordinate and pull resources in from neighboring RMAGs. During Superstorm Sandy, actually before Superstorm Sandy and during, there were actually 9 RMAGs and not 7. So one of the big lessons learned from Superstorm Sandy was that consolidating 3 of the Northeast Mid-Atlantic RMAGs, the New England, New York, and Mid-Atlantic, into one RMAG, now called the North Atlantic Mutual Assistance Group, was probably a good thing to do. We worked on it. We ended up getting, I think Shelby agrees with that statement. We worked on it. She does? Okay, good. We worked on it as an industry, working with the RMAGs and the members of the Mutual Assistance Subject Matter Expert Committees. And we worked through the governance process, and we did create the North Atlantic Mutual Assistance Group. And one of the reasons why that was created was because during Sandy, because of the size of the storm versus the size of the footprint of the RMAGs, we had some situations where RMAGs were actually competing for the same resources. So there was some confusion over the response and where RMAGs should be sending crews and who should be getting what crews and which utilities should be getting which contractors that are involved as well. So with that said, that and some other lessons learned out of Sandy, we created, and it took about a year and a half to create what we call the National Response Event, which basically created a whole framework and governance structure that if an event meets certain criteria, the industry has the tool in the toolkit to activate and trigger a national response event approach to that type of event. Some of the triggers are one of them is if the event is forecasted to or actually is involving numerous RMAGs, and there's some concern about the resource allocation within that type of a scenario, then a CEO or a group of CEOs under our organization can contact the EEI and say, well, look, we want to declare a national response event within the industry so that we can then do a different type of allocation process, pulling in resources from all over the country rather than just a neighboring RMAG or resources within a single RMAG. So we created a whole framework around this. We have the EEI CEOs are involved in this. We created a executive governing committee called the National Response Executive Committee of vice president level I'd say executives of various utilities throughout the different RMAGs to help run this response event. We also have the same people who would be responding in a single RMAG or multiple RMAGs are then brought into another group under the NRE framework called the National Mutual Assistance Resource Team, and they are charged with identifying and allocating the crews to respond to the event. An event like this that would reach kind of a national response event obviously is going to have a lot of public attention, media attention, as Sandy did, and also public policy attention from Capitol Hill, the regulatory commissions, Congress, the various agencies within the administration who, just like it was during Superstorm Sandy. So EEI plays also a very pivotal and integral role within the national response event, providing situational awareness and key messages from the national response event out to agencies such as FEMA, the Department of Energy, Department of Defense, and up to the National Security Council and the White House. So we learned a lot from Sandy. We've taken those lessons learned. We've applied them into this new national response event framework, but we also haven't recreated the wheel. We're still using the same people and the same structures, just tweaked a little bit and reformatted a little bit that we use in a typical single RMAG event or multiple RMAG event. So I hope that answers some of the questions, and I'm available to answer any more as this webinar goes forward.
Okay, great, Chris. Tom, I don't know if it's easy for you to go back to slide 10 or not, but if you remember slide 10, and Chris, when he was speaking, kind of brought a couple things that I do need to mention on this slide. He talked about keeping the structures and coordinating among the RMAGs and how EEI is doing that. And I need to stress the point that we're trying to do as the Fleet Response Working Group we're trying to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts that are out there. And I'll give you a couple of examples. When it comes to the weigh stations, there's a long-term approach that's being looked at with NAPA and EEI, and EEI has brought us in to understand it and do whatever we need to help them going forward. There's a good example of not duplicating and taking advantage of a lot of experts that are out there across in public sector and private sector that can help come up with solutions, both short-term, mid-term, and long-term for these things. Another example I'll give you real quick is the HSSAI, the Homeland Security Studies Analysis Institute, that's actually looking at the waivers and declarations from a federal level. And we're involved in supplying them and telling them what we're doing on these different choke points that slows our movement. While they're not all federal, we're giving them the overview, and then we're focusing in on the federal one for their study as they're directed to. So, and then we're utilizing private sector. There's already private sector that has solved some of these issues when it comes to trip, fuel, and weight permits, and we're utilizing what they already are doing to educate other people. So the big part of this is communicating and coordination and taking advantage of what's already been done, both in the private sector, federal, state, and even local, wherever possible. Tom, I think you're next up.
Okay, thank you, John. We have two slides left, and we're going to open up for questions. There's resources available for this. One, we created a short YouTube video to basically walk through the document. The link is on your screen, and that provides just an overview of what we talked about in a lot more detail. Secondly, you can actually download the document. We keep it on our Fleet Working Group website. The link is there, and that's for view and download. We update it as we need on that website. The next question people say is, how do we stay informed? If you go to the Fleet Working Group website, you can register for alerts. We use this for a number of different things. We parse the people that register for that, and some of those will go on to the fleet movement coordination process, and all will get kind of just general alerts and information. So I would encourage you to go there and have anyone you think is interested in this go there and just register for, at that website. So that let me pause now, and we can open up for any questions you have, either for John or Chris or myself. If your phones are muted, just a reminder to unmute your phone. John, one of the questions that has come in on the webinar is, what do you see the federal liaison and the PSA role here for fleet movement when that information goes out? The question is, what's the role of the FEMA liaison, private sector liaison, or the protective security advisors when there's a fleet movement?
Well, Tom, you or Chris or anybody on the phone can help me with this. We're looking at it as responding to a state. Of course, many of the choke points are within the states and under the control by the states, which I think is totally correct. I think coordination and line of communications is the big part that FEMA can help with, and then help in educating both the private and public sector across the board.
Yeah, one of the things that I've observed as well is the PSAs are very involved on the ground with the private sector and with the states on a day-to-day basis, as well as during an event. And I think the best answer to the question is, this is really for your situational awareness. If you have information that you want to share back with the Fleet Work Group that could be relative, you can forward that information to the Fleet Move website. or to the Fleet Move email, which is fleetmove@fleetresponse.org. That information sent to that email goes right to the RMAG folks involved in it. So that's fleetmove@fleetresponse.org. Another question is same on the private sector. What are the state private sector liaisons' role as they get this? And I think I'll jump in on that one. And John, if you and Chris have a thought. One is situational awareness. But I know for many times during fleet movement, we will get emails from our state private sector folks just telling us of information might be going on within their state to help situation awareness for inbound or flow through fleets. This has happened across a number of ice storms we had last winter. So I think that dialogue with the state private sector liaisons is helpful because we alert them to fleet movement and they can alert the fleet working group back of any specific information relative to what they know or what they've know going on within their state.
This is Chris Eisenbray. So if we take this model up to the national response event framework that I described, there'd be a lot of interest on the state level, probably at a higher level. We're talking about governors, we're talking about public utility commissioners, and the associations that represent those two groups, the National Governors Association, the National Association of Utility Regulatory Commissioners, utility commissioners, also maybe even state legislative interests or the associations that represent the state legislatures, like the National State Legislators Association, National Council of State Legislators. So EEI, working with our members on the national response event, would be managing the flow of information on the industry's response at a very high level with those groups to make sure that any questions about or concerns about the response from the utility industry, again, under a national response event, can be addressed and handled in a unified way for the industry.
And Tom and Chris, one of the things I kind of want to step back to is before an event occurs. While this isn't specific to that question, one of the things that we've had an opportunity and continue to have is educating both the public and private sector on each other's processes. Mutual assistance on the private sector side. Public sector had an opportunity to really learn more about that. They're focused on the EMAP more type scenario, and they didn't know how the level of complexity that we've developed their mutual assistance process. We don't do it for profit. It's at cost. So, a lot of the public sector didn't know that we're assisting each other, utilities, the electric sector, at cost base, and it's not for profit. So we're not trying to take advantage of another utility or things like that. So there's been a lot of great learning experience, both on the private side and the public side, through this type of effort.
Right. Do we have any questions from our states that are on? Okay. Any questions from FEMA?
Tom, this is Jamie Turner. Good afternoon.
Hi, Jamie. How are you, sir?
Well, I've been kind of listening, and I have a question. So I get the impression that from the electrical industry point of view, when you're moving resources interstate, you're going to be directly dealing with FEMA. Is that correct?
No. We're dealing with the state when we're moving resources across. We're dealing with each of the states that we're moving resources in and out of.
Okay.
Yeah, Jamie.
I misunderstood.
When that email goes out to the states, it's specifically aimed at the EMA, right, as the primary.
Right.
And in some cases, transportation, based on the states that have given us directive. Some states want their DOT and their police involved, CC'd on that as well. but primarily it's the EMAs. Okay. Primarily it's EMAs. And then we found out by also letting FEMA and the private sector folks, liaisons, know, that kind of stirred the situational awareness in a positive fashion. So today we were looking at educating our liaisons there, but the primary audience here are the EMAs. Good.
So to clarify, you're using FEMA to notify the private sector liaison. Is that correct?
That is one, yes, that's one way we do it, because we found if we rely on one person or one entity to do it all, it's just not fast enough when you're dealing with 20, 30 states at a time.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm good.
Okay, any questions from FEMA?
It's Jeff Dorco. No, this is absolutely great. I guess as a follow-on to the last comment, one thing, in my role when I'm down in the NRCC, just knowing this makes sure that I'm not doing something untoward. I don't want to intervene in anybody's activities or any supply chain that takes something that's naturally going to fix something and take that off track. So inaction on my part, I think, can be a good thing from your perspective to make sure I'm not dabbling in things I shouldn't be dabbling in, and that I have the appropriate situational awareness to make better decisions up here in other areas.
Yes, thank you, Jeff.
Oh, sorry, Tom.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, sir, this is Chris Eisenberg from EEI. I'm glad that FEMA is actually on the call. I'm glad that most of the folks are representing FEMA. I just want to let you know that one area that EEI is working very closely with staff at FEMA is with the power outage incident annex activities that are going on, and trying to determine another lesson learned out of Sandy was, it was advantageous to have industry representation in or near the NRCC, and trying to codify that in some way or formalize it in some way so that the next big event takes place. You'll have that voice and that guidance already ready to go, rather than kind of bringing it in haphazardly or ad hoc way as it was done during Sandy.
Yeah, that's why I want to have my nose a little bit under the tent flap, and I really appreciate the invitation here, because I know the planners have worked this a little bit, but as an executor, in my day-to-day job as the assistant administrator for logistics, when I walk downstairs, I have a much broader perspective and running the resource support section of the NRCC. I'm just finding that there are connections in FEMA that I need to make, so that I can, one, make better decisions, but I need to plug into the planners better. And you stated it exactly. We don't want to be making this up on the fly. We want to have kind of a logical way forward, so we're all tied together early on, so we don't make any missteps and we understand what you're doing.
Thank you, Jeff. And this is an opportunity, I think, going forward. If we can better synchronize or coordinate our tabletops or our exercises, EEI holds one annually, and I know FEMA does one. If there's a way to integrate some of that, the idea here is to get fleet movement information coordinated with fuel and maybe other supply chain issues, so that business can get back to business quicker, and the federal agencies can help move resources or help coordinate with states to do that, and the states know what's coming, so they know help's on the way, or they know they don't stand on the air hose without knowing it, so to say. I mean that respectfully, but sometimes some of the states have been marvelous in helping this. Once they had the information, we've seen police escorts. I think North Carolina actually activated their EOC one time to move fleets quickly. So the states have been very supportive. It's just getting this information to the right people. So, any other questions from our folks at DHS, the PSAs, or anyone else on the call?
It's Steve White from FEMA. I've got one.
Sure thing, Steve.
To go back to what you were talking about a while ago with the private sector, as the working groups collaborate, and as you went through the slides this morning, you were talking about emails 1, 2, 3, 4. If you have a kind of a cross-pollination on that, where we all know fuel plays a big part in transportation, power, and everything else. So if you've got a fuel working group, and you also have another one in transportation, how do those share information between those two groups? How's that done?
John,
Tom, can I give it?
Yeah, sure.
And then you can correct me from everything. That is a great question, and the reason why I say that is this is something that Tom and I have been spending that's maybe a few sleepless nights on it. The Fleet Response Working Group, and we have an executive steering committee over the group. The executive steering committee almost looks and feels like the Fleet Response Working Group. And let's face it, we went after the electric sector first, and the public sector wanted us to go up kind of into that direction, which I totally agreed with. There was a couple reasons. It's highly regulated. There's a lot of consistency. There was already a lot of interaction. There's while there's some competitiveness between the electric sector companies, when it comes to emergency response, there is no competitiveness. It goes away. So one of the things we want to strive through this year, I know it's August, and I know there's only a few months left, but this year we want to really develop the working groups for fuel, for telecommunications, for food, and electric one, and then a fleet response one that really focuses on commercial motor vehicles as a whole, moving them up and down the road. And then the executive steering committee looks different now. It becomes representatives from each one of those working groups. And then when there's something that occurs in any of the working groups that can be used elsewhere, so like in the fleet response working group, when we talk about toll stations, when we talk about weigh stations, when we talk about waivers and declarations, a lot of that can be used across sector. So the idea is move quickly and effectively and get the right people into these groups. Fuel, when I hear fuel, I've attended one fuel exercise, and I walked out of there and I said to myself, I have almost 40 years in the electric sector, and I said, how do they do it? You know, their trucks can only carry certain type of fuel depending on if there's a waiver or not. And it goes on and on and on. And then they're dealing with competitiveness between. So that's a very good question. And Tom, I'm sure you want to add something to this, but we are driving very aggressively to create these other working groups we already have people from these groups. It's now developing them further so they have a more moving ahead type approach. Tom, go ahead.
No, John, I think you hit it. I think we are, as a work group, we created a model now that can work with multiple sectors, and I think you nailed it, John. Was we got to redesign our framework structure to look at how we add those groups on it, and we have nominees for those sectors too, by the way, which I think will be important, Steve, as we go forward. So.
Okay.
Anyway, as we wrap up, I just wanted to show you on our website, you'll see some of the disaster tools that have been produced by the work group. These are live and operational now. If you go to fleetresponse.org, you'll get a chance to click on those and look at it. There's been a variety of, every one of these tools has been produced because it was an operational issue by states and brought up by states or companies. So each one of these has a story behind it. And there are others in the waking right now. We're working the weigh station issue. We're working sensitive information sharing issue now. And there'll be more to come. So are there any other questions before we conclude? This slide is in the back of your slide decks, by the way. It's just part of the extra slides that we had. So hearing no other questions, I want to thank everyone for attending. This is recorded. You'll get a link to it to share with colleagues and revisit again if you'd like to. John, Chris, thank you much for your time, and as well as Shelby. We always appreciate everyone's support on these matters. So thank you all, and have a great afternoon.